Few people knew the truth until now. Agnetha Faltskog is finally breaking her silence on BJÖRN ULVAEUS. What really happened behind the glittering lights of ABBA's rise to global fame? Stay with us because this story reveals the hidden moments that changed everything. Before the heartbreak, before the tension, there was music, love, and a spark that would bring four people together in a way no one could have imagined. As we step back into these early years, take a moment for yourself. Breathe deeply, settle in, and let's journey into the beginnings of ABBA's story. By the dawn of 1969, Benny Andersson made the bold decision to leave the Hepstars, marking a turning point in his career. From then on, he and BJÖRN ULVAEUS began focusing entirely on writing and recording music together. Their work caught the eye of Stig Andersson, a record company owner and publisher, who would soon become ABBA's legendary manager. Stig was convinced of their extraordinary talent and reassured the two young musicians that worldwide success was only a matter of time. His unwavering belief gave BJÖRN and Benny the encouragement and determination they needed, especially during those fragile early stages of their partnership. Not long after releasing their first single, BJÖRN and Benny decided to push forward with a second attempt, a track called "Hey Old Man." What made this recording truly special was the inclusion of backing vocals from their fiancées, Agnetha Faltskog and Annie Fried Lyngstad. This moment quietly marked history. It was the very first time all four future members of ABBA appeared together on the same record, planting the earliest seeds of what would later become a musical empire. Annie Fried, already an established recording artist since the autumn of 1967, crossed paths with Benny in Malmö in March 1969. At that time, the Hepstars were playing at a different venue in the same city, yet fate seemed to be pulling them closer together. Their meeting added another piece to the puzzle of destiny that would eventually form the world's most iconic pop group. Agnetha, unlike many young artists of her time, had already carved out a name for herself as a successful solo singer. Yet behind the spotlight, she was still a shy and somewhat naive young woman, trying to find her place in life. During this period, she entered a relationship with Dieter Zimmermann. At first, everything seemed pleasant enough. Dieter appeared charming, and when he proposed, Agnetha accepted, not realizing what lay ahead. But as weeks turned into months, she began to sense the cracks beneath the surface. The dreamlike engagement started to feel like a trap, and soon, Agnetha knew she wanted no part in it anymore. Her doubts became undeniable when the engagement was splashed across the Swedish and German press. One evening, she accidentally overheard Dieter in conversation with someone else, and the truth struck her like lightning. The entire arrangement had been orchestrated for publicity. She was just 19, while Dieter was already 40, and the so-called marriage was nothing more than a scheme to generate fame in Germany. What had begun as an innocent promise of love now revealed itself as little more than a transaction. Meanwhile, in another corner of the Swedish music scene, BJÖRN, Benny, and Stig were at a radio station, casually chatting about life and relationships. Benny shared with the others that he and Annie Fried were beginning to take their bond seriously. BJÖRN, slightly surprised, questioned why the need for such seriousness, only for Benny to reply with a calm wisdom that every relationship has its own rhythm, and there's no one way to define its pace. Their light-hearted banter was suddenly interrupted when a song began playing on the radio. Benny leaned forward, asked Stig to turn up the volume, and the room instantly grew quiet. A young female voice floated through the speakers, delicate yet powerful, carrying a depth that was impossible to ignore. The three men sat in stunned admiration. For BJÖRN, the effect was immediate and overwhelming. It was as if he had fallen in love with a voice before even meeting the person behind it. As the song faded, he demanded to know who the singer was and asked if he could see a picture of her. Stig answered. The voice belonged to Agnetha Faltskog. BJÖRN, visibly captivated, insisted that he had to meet her. Benny teased him, calling him obsessed, but BJÖRN only smiled, insisting that he believed it was love. Stig, trying to temper his excitement, informed him of her supposed engagement. Still, when they learned that her fiancé was so much older, they quietly guessed the relationship wouldn't last long. To BJÖRN, this only fueled his determination. Engaged or not, he was certain he needed to meet Agnetha. For Agnetha, the journey to this moment had begun long before. Nearly 2 years earlier, she had moved to Stockholm after being discovered by Little Gerhard, who offered her a recording contract. At the time, she balanced life as the lead singer of a local dance band with her job as a switchboard operator at a car dealership. It was in those quiet moments of juggling dreams and responsibilities that she began writing her own music. Her very first song, I'm So in Love, captured the innocence of her first romance and the heartbreak that followed. And little did she know, just as her voice was starting to reach new ears, fate was already preparing to intertwine her path with Björn's in ways she could not yet imagine. After the heartbreak of her broken engagement, Agnetha decided to move back in with her parents, seeking comfort in the familiar warmth of home. One quiet afternoon, she turned on the radio and by chance, a song from the Hootenanny Singers began to play. Like so many young women of her generation, Agnetha admired both the Hootenanny Singers and the Hep Stars. A few of her friends openly admitted having crushes on BJÖRN ULVAEUS, and secretly, Agnetha shared the same feelings. Yet, she kept her admiration hidden, convinced that someone like Björn could never possibly notice a girl like her, especially now when the newspapers across Sweden and Germany were buzzing with reports of her failed engagement. Meanwhile, Björn was back in the studio with Benny Andersson when Stig Andersson arrived with exciting news. He revealed that Björn had been booked for a special appearance on Highlands Horna the following week. Not only would Björn be one of the featured performers, but even more thrilling, he would be sharing the stage in a duet with none other than Agnetha Faltskog. By May 1969, Destiny had finally arranged their first meeting. Appearing together on the same show, Björn and Agnetha instantly felt a spark neither could deny. That very same day, their chemistry blossomed into a magical moment, sealed with their very first kiss, a beginning that seemed almost written in the stars. Though their romance was filled with sweetness, fame quickly introduced complications. The couple's journey wasn't always simple, and their path was as challenging as it was enchanting. In November 1970, the two couples who would later form ABBA stepped into the public eye together with the cabaret act Festfolk. Though the performance wasn't particularly successful and the idea of forming a permanent group was put aside, their creative collaborations quietly deepened. They frequently appeared on each other's records and supported one another's musical projects. By July 1971, Björn and Agnetha tied the knot. That autumn, Björn and Benny began working as in-house producers at Stig Andersson's record company. At the same time, Benny and Annie Frid's relationship grew more serious. They had moved in together with their children and were on the path to marriage. Björn and Agnetha also started their life together, sharing a small apartment in Lilla Essingen. Both their relationship and their careers thrived. Björn remained busy in the studio alongside Benny and Stig, while Agnetha released a brand new album. It wasn't long before Björn and Agnetha became inseparable. To the public, they soon embodied Sweden's beloved musical power couple. What made their bond so remarkable was how their genuine connection spilled over into their music, infusing emotion, warmth, and authenticity into the songs that would eventually define ABBA's sound. By the spring of 1972, Stig Andersson, always the visionary, decided it was time to give the four musicians a single name, ABBA. Their first official single, People Need Love, was released shortly after. Though credited under a slightly different name, it climbed into Sweden's top 20, marking the beginning of a new chapter that would soon captivate the entire world. Before we continue, take a pause for yourself, stretch your shoulders, sip some water, or simply breathe deeply. The story of ABBA is as much about music as it is about life, and it's worth experiencing with a clear, relaxed mind. In February 1973, the group stepped onto a much bigger stage when they entered the Swedish heats for the Eurovision Song Contest with Ring Ring, a lively track crafted by Björn, Benny, and Stig Andersson. At the time of the competition, Agnetha was heavily pregnant with her and Björn's first child, their daughter Linda. Despite the personal challenges, the group's single quickly climbed the Swedish charts, landing among the top 3 places of the combined singles and albums rankings. This success was the final push they needed. For the first time, all four decided to set aside their solo ambitions and pour their energy into the band as a collective. But even as their professional journey became clearer, their personal lives carried complications. Agnetha, with her natural shyness and deep sensitivity, often contrasted sharply with Björn's driven, determined, and extroverted personality. What once felt like a perfect balance between them would, in time, turn into a source of both admiration and strain. Their love story, however, had begun with fairy tale hope. Married on July 6, 1971, they had spoken of children almost from the start of their relationship. Both believed that starting a family would make their bond complete. Yet when they struggled to conceive, frustration weighed heavily on them to the point where they even considered adoption. Fortune, however, eventually smiled on them. In 1973, Agnetha gave birth to their daughter Linda, and later their second child, Christian, arrived. To the world, the couple now seemed to have everything: love, family, and music. But success came with its own price. While Björn thrived in the spotlight, energized by the band's growing opportunities, Agnetha often felt the opposite. The endless touring, interviews, and commitments created an invisible wall between her and her children. As ABBA's international fame skyrocketed, especially after their Eurovision victory, Agnetha quietly battled the psychological toll of constant travel and separation. More than stardom, what she longed for was stability, the chance to watch her children grow up without missing the irreplaceable little moments. The deeper ABBA's success grew, the more isolated Agnetha began to feel. At home, the warmth of their once sweet marriage started to fade under the pressure of fame. Though they lived together whenever they weren't touring, the bond between them weakened. Björn threw himself into the studio, consumed by ambition and work, while Agnetha found her only refuge in the countryside and in the presence of her children. As the years passed, the cracks widened. They both made efforts to repair what was breaking, but their opposing needs only drove them further apart. Björn thrived on long tours and constant appearances, convinced that ABBA had to seize every opportunity to remain at the top. Agnetha, meanwhile, longed for peace at home, time with her children, and a life less defined by the exhausting pace of fame. The disagreements between Agnetha and Björn, which once seemed minor compared to the powerful bond they had shared, gradually grew into something far deeper, an unbridgeable divide. What began as small misunderstandings soon spilled into their professional lives, affecting even their time in the recording studio. There were days when Agnetha dreaded joining the group on trips, while Björn and the rest of ABBA eagerly mapped out ambitious international tours. On more than one occasion, Björn brushed aside Agnetha's concerns, dismissing them as unnecessary obstacles that only stood in the way of ABBA's unstoppable rise. This left her feeling unheard and invisible. Their arguments, often sharp and exhausting, were followed by long, heavy silences, periods in which Agnetha retreated into herself, while Björn, ever the workaholic, drowned his energy into planning the band's next big project. Each passing week seemed to stretch the emotional gap between them further apart. Adding to the strain was Agnetha's lifelong fear of flying. For her, every new tour announcement was not just about schedules and rehearsals. It meant panic, sleepless nights, and a looming dread. Björn, unable or unwilling to understand this side of her, never offered the reassurance she craved. This made each journey more painful, reinforcing the sense that her needs and emotions no longer had a place in their life together. To the outside world, however, they remained the golden couple of pop music. They smiled for cameras, stood side by side on stage, and seemed to embody the dream that millions admired. But behind closed doors, Agnetha carried an increasing sadness, feeling more like a stranger in her own marriage. By early 1979, the inevitable could no longer be ignored. Agnetha admitted that she could not endure the constant struggles and the loneliness she felt. Their marriage had reached its breaking point, and the news of their separation shocked fans everywhere. To make matters even more painful, Björn moved on almost immediately, beginning a new relationship within weeks of the split. For Agnetha, this was a wound layered upon another, the pain of losing her husband compounded by the sight of him so quickly in someone else's arms. She later confessed that during this period, she felt like only a shadow of her former self, drained by a marriage that had asked for everything but returned so little. In January 1979, ABBA released Chiquitita, debuting it at the UNICEF All-Star Gala in New York. The song would go on to become their most successful single of that year. Yet, behind the applause and success came the distressing confirmation of their divorce. Rumors immediately swirled that ABBA might not survive such a personal rupture. Still, they continued to deliver music that lifted spirits around the globe, even as their private lives fell apart. To the world, the picture remained perfect. Hit after hit, dazzling performances, radiant smiles. But as Agnetha herself would later reveal, fame had changed Björn. The man she had once fallen in love with, supportive, gentle, and full of shared dreams, had slowly transformed into someone she no longer recognized. As ABBA climbed higher and higher on the world stage, Björn's passion for success grew into something all-consuming. He devoted endless hours to polishing new songs, planning ambitious tours, and managing every detail of production. For Agnetha, the hardest part was not the long hours or the pressure of fame. It was the deep ache of feeling invisible to the man she loved. She later admitted that their lives began to feel like one long performance, staged for the cameras. Behind the smiles, her heart was breaking. Björn's ambition seemed limitless. For him, ABBA was not just a career, it was everything. But for Agnetha, those years became increasingly lonely. Surrounded by thousands of adoring fans, she still felt isolated, her voice and her needs drowned out by the relentless machinery of fame. Björn, lost in his own vision, seemed unable to offer the comfort or balance she desperately longed for. At times, Agnetha felt as though she was disappearing, not just as a singer, but as a person. One evening stood out vividly in her memory. A rare night when they were alone together, away from the flashing lights and the demands of the industry. She poured out her heart, explaining her need for peace, for stability, for a chance to simply breathe. But before she could finish, Björn brushed her off, insisting they had to stay strong, for ABBA's sake. To Agnetha, the words cut like a slap. It felt as though her feelings no longer mattered to him. His world was built around ambition, while hers was quietly crumbling beneath the weight of neglect. After years of silencing her own needs, their eventual separation left her with a profound sense of betrayal. While she mourned the end of their love, Björn seemed to move forward swiftly, leaving her with the painful impression that he had already let go long before she did. The press only added to her sorrow, branding her with cruel headlines that called her the abandoned wife. Still, the story did not end with their divorce. For ABBA's sake, both Björn and Agnetha were forced to maintain a professional front. It was an emotionally complex period, balancing the world's expectations with the personal heartbreak they carried. To the public, Björn often downplayed the bitterness of their split, but Agnetha's own words revealed the depth of her hurt and the struggle of having her voice overshadowed by Björn's single-minded drive for success. In the years that followed, they continued to perform together, even as the wounds of their divorce were still raw. Somehow, professionalism held them together, but the cracks soon became visible. On-stage interactions that had once been warm and playful turned cool, formal, and distant. The distance in their music mirrored the distance in their hearts. For Agnetha, the pain was not only the loss of her marriage, it was the realization that she had sacrificed so much of herself to sustain something that could not last. Björn, looking back, has spoken of regret for the hurt caused by their separation, though he often highlights the creative fire it brought to ABBA's music. This contrast revealed just how differently each of them saw the ending of their love story. Agnetha, by contrast, has remained guarded about those years, preferring to focus on her life beyond ABBA. Though decades have passed, their marriage remains one of the most poignant and painful chapters in ABBA's history, still remembered by fans and dissected by the media. ABBA never formally announced a breakup, but after their last public performance together in 1982, the silence spoke for itself. In the years that followed, Agnetha retreated from the spotlight, pouring her emotions into her solo work. Her songs carried echoes of heartbreak, healing, and the quiet sadness she had endured. More than anything, her decision to step away from public life was her way of reclaiming the peace and privacy she had once longed for. For Björn, the path unfolded differently. Rather than retreating, he chose to channel the turbulence of his past into creativity. He immersed himself in writing musicals and developing new projects, weaving pieces of his personal journey into the stories he helped bring to life. In this way, he managed to move forward, yet the shadow of his history with Agnetha never fully left his public image. Even years later, whenever ABBA reunited for a special performance, all eyes inevitably turned to Björn and Agnetha. Fans could not help but wonder, had time softened the wounds of their separation? Did the old spark still linger beneath the surface smiles? Their on-stage chemistry remained a subject of fascination, keeping their story alive in the public imagination. For Agnetha, however, the choice was far more personal. She once admitted that if she hadn't stepped away, she would have lost herself completely. Letting go of the dream they had once shared was agonizing, especially since it seemed to haunt every part of her life. There were days when she questioned herself, wondering if walking away had truly been the right decision. But deep within, she understood that returning was impossible. That former life had nearly consumed her. Slowly, with patience and courage, she began to rebuild from the ground up. She poured her heart into her solo music, producing albums that were not only collections of songs, but reflections of her journey, her struggles, her healing, and her voice. For her, leaving was an act of self-respect. It wasn't simply about ending a marriage with Björn, it was about reclaiming her happiness and defining life on her own terms. Looking back after years of distance, she recognizes that her decision was not just a step away from someone else, but a leap forward into her own freedom. And so, their stories, though different, reveal the very human struggles hidden behind the glitter of fame. What do you think about this chapter of Björn and Agnetha's journey? Was it courage, heartbreak, or perhaps both? Share your thoughts below, and if you'd like to continue exploring their story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you won't miss the next part.